I left science how many years ago? I shouldn't say I left science because that's not the right thing. I left academia about 5 years ago, I think, 5 or 6 years ago, to go brewing, and it's a pretty big step for me. I spent all my life in science, actually. When you think about it, I of course did all those science courses you do through high school and then to university, and then away working as a science technician, then back to university, PhD, and then postdocing, and then working here in contract work at Canterbury University, so I'm guessing a fair few years. But the time came for various reasons why I had to leave, and we'll delve into those a little bit in a while. But I was just thinking about actually the talk this afternoon, and it's interesting, as all of you would know, being at conferences, being the last talk in the afternoon, you know, everybody's had enough, really, and Bill would have realised this when he was doing the schedule, and he would have thought, who should I get in, what will the audience be thinking about? And of course beer comes to his mind, so he emails me and says, do you mind coming along and having a wee chat? And I say, yeah, that sounds fine. He emails back saying, oh, thanks for offering to come along and have a chat. Do you mind if you bring some beer along as well? And then PPS, do you mind if you start with a joke? And that was it from then on. That's not really the truth, but it's tricky with this one because innovation's not really something that's recent in beer making. I mean, innovation going out and doing something like Sam was talking about just before is amazing. And actually that reminded me, Sam, when you're talking about serendipity, I thought there's another expression as well that says, the harder I work, the luckier I get, which I think is an easy translation of that one as well. But innovation, it's sort of an interesting thing with beer. You're talking about innovation, you're talking about thousands of years, of course, of beer making. So you're not stepping into something that's a new product, developing it and being entrepreneurial like Sam was. But it is certainly a product that we certainly should stick with. I mean, we've stuck with it for perhaps, some would say 30,000 years, and some would say right from the caveman ages, but usually about 9,000 years is about where you start thinking about beer making. Just to give you some idea about the history, you know, we're thinking about beer making and the lack of innovation, you might think of it, or the slow pace of innovation. We're talking about this sort of 9,000 BC, 17,000 BC before the first real evidence of recorded beer making on tablets. But then we're talking about science and beer making are way down here, way down only about 2,500 years ago. So that's still a fair stretch back, isn't it? But as you know, beer making's a pretty technical process these days, and there's a lot of innovation goes on in beer making, pushing those products, pushing those boundaries. It's not something that we're in as a small business, so I won't talk to you about that because we only bleed off other people, unlike what Sam does as being at the forefront of that innovation. We're just simply in the business. But the question that Bill posed for me was, is a PhD useful for making good beer and a successful business? And the thought came to my mind, yeah, it's about as useful as having a driver's license. And that's, I mean, I felt bad about that. I thought, well, but it's quite true in a way. I didn't go to do a PhD to go into business. That wasn't what I thought about when I started into the serious science of a PhD. But it doesn't mean, so you sort of got to turn the question around really. Since you go into business, what can you drag out of your PhD or your PhD studies that helps you in business rather than the other way around? And that made me think more about why I left science, or why I left academia, I should say. I'll stop using the word leaving science because you never leave science, of course. But why I left academia, and I thought, well, I'll go and have a wee look and see if I can remind myself why I left academia. So I thought I'll go to my old favourite websites. Haven't visited for a while, but I'll go back and have a look. Plant and food research. Anybody from that esteemed institute in the room here? We've got one. All right, it's a great place. But I thought, no, I didn't go with it. I went to have a look at the latest jobs. So I clicked on there and I got all those flooded memories back about what science is about, particularly at a lot of your people's levels, about what happens with science and why you're in it. So we go to the website here, and the ones that did work, luckily their one did work, so when you clicked on vacancy, something came up rather than saying, error, you're at the wrong, you're going in the wrong direction. And what's interesting about these, when I looked at them, you look at this first one, there's only one is there one full-time job at the top there? Scientist, there we are, metabolic stress and inflammation fixed. But the thing that caught me was a fixed term 12-month appointment. So this is the job, you know, it's for 12 months, and that's what often science is about, these little short-term pieces of work. The rest of it, PhD, PhD, PhD. Well, there's 3 people training for a PhD for potentially that one job at the top, or the part-time job underneath it. And that is the nature of academia, isn't it? And so that's part of the thing why Bill does such a good job running these, is you have to think, once you're in this situation that you're probably now, think outside the square. Where can you head? Because the chances of academia or position in academia get relatively thin and narrow. So I thought, bugger that, I'll go somewhere else. Land care research here's a good one as well. There's bound to be jobs in land care research, considering our current environment. If we don't sell most of it off to overseas ventures, we'll have something to look after with land care. And clicked on there, well, pretty much the same, wasn't it? We have a memorial fellowship. You know what that's going to mean? It's going to mean, maybe 12 months doing something, apply now. Science, this one interested me, the science talent pool. What's that one? So I thought, I must register for that one because they're accepting interest. So if you want to be in the science talent pool, then get on there and fill out that form. I might do that actually, just to see if anybody contacts me. They'll probably contact me. Yeah, can you come out for an interview and can you bring some beer? That might be the way. But there was not much else in there. Postdoctoral fellowship, a senior fellowship. They're all fellowships, relatively short term, and a technician position on greenhouse gas exchange, that old chestnut. Anybody from land care research here? Does anybody work at land care research anymore? I don't know. But so that did remind me about why I ended up leaving science. It's hard work, and it is hard work and it's stressful and it's short term, and the chances of succeeding of where you initially head out, you think you're heading, are relatively slim. So it's worth thinking about, branching out, going out there and doing something else with that degree or PhD or with that science. So for PhD, how has it helped me? And I just put this wee collage together because beer is such a great industry for many reasons. As beer is, there's not many things you go through your life needing in life. One of them is beer, and the other one I couldn't show you images of, so I just left that one off. But beer it is, it's universal, it's worldwide, it's a social product, people love it, they want to talk to you about it, they want to try it, most people this is, there's a few that don't, of course. But this is a nice wee one here. We've got all these famous people. This one here, what's her name? Lady Gaga, for those of you. And these ones up here, so you'll do anything for beer. So basically all you have a job for, or all you're after money for, is pretty much so you can buy yourself some beer tokens, and that's pretty much what it's about. Babe Ruth, I think, is this one here, if anybody can remember that era. But seriously, just thinking seriously, is a PhD useful for making good beer and a successful business? And the answer probably much is, yes, it is useful, but probably no more useful than I could have got there without all those years of science. So right from growing hops, right through to using those hops, isomerization of alpha acids within those hops. We've got barley growing, we've got barley malting and all those processes with those amylases and those enzymes that go on. Through into the brewing process, which I've left off here for some reason, about the boiling up of those sugars and proteins and those amino acids and all those Maillard reaction types of things that go on. And then, of course, you've got the whole biology of yeast right from genetics right through to metabolism and yeast producing alcohol and those flavours like the esters and ester metabolism. Then on the other extremes of it, of course, you've got right through to water chemistry. You deal with that every day when you're in this industry, worrying about what the water's like, what the pH is like, what the mineral content is like, and adjusting that. And right through to the final end product where you're getting that beer to that package level where you're looking about oxidation of your product, microbial infection, and then right through to that whole marketing thing, and a bit like Sam was saying as well. When you get to that end, you're trying to market, you're talking to people, you're selling your product, and probably the best part, in a way of it, when you finally sell that product that you worked on for all that time. So there's sort of no difference. So there's a hell of a lot of science in there, of course, and of course having a background with a PhD in biochemistry is great, because when you're reading about this, and you can go right into the depths of as far in science as you can in any other science, and food science in particular is very, very strong and fully funded throughout the world. So there's a lot of research into food technology. You can go right back and read those, and when I go and do that, it's quite nice, because I can read things, I can understand what's going on, and I can miss out all the really boring bits and papers like you used to, and just read that bit, and that's done. And it's interesting, you don't realise how much of that training and how much of that analysis and that analytical brain comes from you having that scientific career. Because what happens, I find, within the industry, if you give someone else a scientific paper, and you can just see them glaze over straight away, and then you explain, well, you don't need to don't read all that, just read that bit and that bit. And even that becomes really difficult, because the technical way things are written are so foreign. Not because they're difficult, they're just foreign. So then if you're not scientifically, if you're overwhelmed with the science, there's also the other side of brewing, which is the real engineering side of things. And I haven't got any great engineering pictures on here, but it's a pretty high-tech industry at one end of the spectrum, down here, like the Heinekens and the larger breweries of the world, right down to where you might even brew at home. You know, there's no, or we might use a little microbrewery plant in the brewery. There's no difference in what's going on, it's just difference of how you approach that whole engineering process. And that's really exciting for me, putting together that sort of engineering side of things. It's all relatively new, and but it's a hands-on thing, almost like exactly what Sam was saying as well, that you need that real practicality to get out there and do these things. And I think that applies particularly in New Zealand, and we're good at that, and we do that in science as well. You become someone who gets pretty good at a whole lot of different jobs, because basically you have to. There's not a lot of people you can go to help you out, just because of the population of New Zealand. And it's not easy, so you end up doing a whole lot of little bits and pieces. And that's one thing that a PhD allows you to do. So when I was saying that it's about as useful as a driver's license, what I really meant is that having a PhD in science, it doesn't really provide any specific skills in entrepreneurship, because there's a more direct ways to get to be an entrepreneur than coming through a PhD and through into the academia of science. But it does indicate one thing, and that indicates that you are a scientist, and with all that training, you have a whole lot of ways you think about things and the way you do things that are really applicable to entrepreneurship. I'm a bit gutted about my list now after seeing Sam's one. It's the last time I'm going to mention his good talk, because he had much more comprehensive and better lists than me. So, but he obviously had more time to do it. That's what I'm going to say. All those flights he had overseas, he must have been doing his talk. But what I did like is the overlap between what I'd listed here as for an entrepreneur and those requirements, and what matched up with his list as well. But what a PhD means, and what science means in that particular, is being able to generate and use the knowledge you generate to solve problems. And that's a really, really crucial thing. You know, you're not stumped by a problem, you're always looking for ways around it, and you have the ability and the knowledge to find out whether you can get around those problems. So you don't simply come up against brick walls. Well, you do come up against brick walls, but you find your way around them, just like you would if you were doing a PhD. You come up against brick walls every time. You know, you think, well, what am I going to do now? You know, 2 experiments, it hasn't gone anywhere where I thought it was going to go. What am I going to do now? And you think of another way around it. You use the power of reason in science all the time, and that's a great thing in business as well. You have to be reasonable. You can't be unreasonable in science, in entrepreneurship. It just doesn't work. People won't deal with you for a start if you're really unreasonable. You use an analytical and a logical approach. That's particularly important in, say, in brewing for that matter. If something's going right, you look at why it's going right and what you need to do to keep it going right. If something's going wrong, you need a logical and analytical approach to be able to find out why it's going wrong and fixing it, rather than just randomly looking at the problem or giving up on the whole problem you've encountered. You're trained to find solutions, and with that, and information as well, and that's really key. So if you don't know something, and this is what doing a PhD and doing science is about, something you learn in a science career, is if you don't know something, you simply go and find it out. You just take your time, you go away, you know where to look for information, you go and find it, and you learn it, and that's because that's basically what science is about, isn't it? You don't simply stop because you don't have the answer to something like 5-year-old children do. They come up and ask you a question, they don't have the answer, they drift off, and they don't care about finding out why it happens generally. Because science teaches you that, well, I can't do this, so I have to learn how to do this. And you go through the process and the stages of learning and gathering that information together so you know where you're heading and what you're doing. The other thing about doing a PhD is generally some supervisors will argue against this, but you're generally self-directed and self-motivated. And you should be. If you're going to be a successful one, you certainly do have to be self-motivated and self-directed. And that's a key thing as well in business, because nobody else is going to do it for you. If you are the entrepreneur or the business owner, nobody comes in, sets your alarm in the morning and gets you up at 6 in the morning to go to work. Just nobody does it. So if you want to sleep until 10 o'clock and wander into work, nobody paid you to do it. You can do it, you know. You have a relatively short career as an entrepreneur. So you have to be self-motivated, self-directed, but that generally is what you end up with when you finish your PhD, maybe not at the start, but at the end of it you should be. And finally, and in New Zealand, and this is what Sam touched on as well, PhD can mean that you're a bit of a polymath. It means you're good at all sorts of things. The polymath tradition is very good at all sorts of things, but you generally tend to be a jack of all trades. You can turn your hand to something out of necessity. So if something goes wrong when you're doing your science work, doing your research, you find a way around it. You have to build stuff when you're a scientist in the lab, particularly biological sciences or engineering sciences, those types I mean. You need something in the lab, you'll piece it together, you'll build it, you'll grab this and that, and you'll do scrounge, and you'll grab and you'll do all sorts of things to piece it together. So you have that little bit of engineering, that little bit of building going on. As I say, you have to go and find information from all sorts of places, so you become a bit of a scrounger in the information front as well. And not only that, you have to promote yourself. In science in New Zealand, nobody comes and offers you money, and so you have to be a self-promoter. You have to get out there and do that advertising yourself. So you do become a bit of a polymath. You become a bit good at all sorts of things, and that's really good in business as well, particularly small business, because you end up having to do all of those little bits and pieces. So is the move to entrepreneurship easy? And I was thinking about this for a while, and I thought I'd make a table, because tables are, that's what you need, isn't it? That's how you can't get away from that type of thinking, no matter how long you've been away. So I'll make a table. So I made a table, and it's not a very good one, but it sort of helps direct me more than it will you. So we've got what goes on in business and what goes on in academia here. See, I've stopped calling it science, I'm calling it academia now. And I've made a wee list of things and over here, whether they're easier, harder, more difficult, all those bits and pieces. So we'll run through those. So the first one probably is financial accountability. And this means that if something goes bottom up when you're doing it, who's liable for it? You know, is that it for the business? Or is that it if you're an academic? And generally, it's obvious, isn't it? It's in business, it's pretty direct and rapid. So if something goes really wrong, you run out of money. There's no option, and you are financially accountable for that. So someone's going to turn around when you've wrecked their piece of equipment and say to you, you've got to pay us for that equipment. Whereas if you can do that in the lab, you wreck the microscope, you just sneak out the door, close it, and hope that somebody else will come in and find it broken and say, look, the microscope's broken, what are we going to do? But no, that's not quite right, but you know what I mean by that. It doesn't really matter. You can get a grant, for example. You can get a Marsden grant. After 5 years of using your Marsden grant, at the end of it, you're not directly accountable for what happened to that $1 million, are you? If somebody doesn't turn up, knock on your door and say, all right, we gave you $1 million, just put all the stuff you've made over here. And you go, I actually haven't done anything. Nothing's worked, but can I have some more money? So there is that. Of course, that's not completely true, because when you apply for your next Marsden grant, you're only half as likely to get it. Social accountability is another one that's strict in business. It can be very high. Of course, you're socially accountable, so if we poison somebody, then someone will come around, knock on the door and send us off to jail. And of course, you get the other extreme of that accountability, social accountability can be quite low in business, and only by accident. For example, you know, at the moment there's a dirty dairying thing going on. Who's accountable for that? And these businesses, you know, somebody's saying they're not accountable enough. So that's why it can be high or incredibly low, the accountability in business, social accountability. And the social accountability is also an interesting one when you're talking about the alcohol industry, of course. In academia, it's pretty low to medium, really. Nobody comes and knocks on the university's door and says, you introduced European WASPs in 1854, and now look, you've actually got to pay to clean it up. It just doesn't happen, does it? Even though all those mistakes have been made through science and academia in the past in New Zealand. So you're pretty safe there, to be honest. The other one is the reward to effort ratio, and in business it's often very direct. So the harder you work, this is the thing, the more likely you are to succeed, and that's just the nature of business. And it's often in academia indirect, so often you work really hard and you're not rewarded for it. And I mean, that can happen in business as well. You can work really hard and something will go wrong, but generally not, because you're capable of changing directions and being more self-directed. Whereas in academia, sometimes you can work really, really hard at something and nothing happens. You don't get a pay rise, you don't get the job, you don't get a promotion. And that's just the nature of the industry as well. It's so small and so difficult to progress in that in a logical, directed way. And the implementation of ideas, so in business it's usually very rapid, because if you had a good idea in business, people want to know about it. They want to have a go at it, they want to help you out, they want to get moving, they want to crank you along in it. And that is the same in academia, but it can be really slow, because you have a good idea and then there's really not too much you can do about it until you get somebody to fund you. And of course that comes around for some things once a year, once every 6 months. And often it's slow, you have to get all the ducks in a line before you can make that progress. So sometimes it can be very slow. The financial reward, well, that's a reasonably obvious one. In business, it can be incredibly low or incredibly high. That's just the nature, and it comes back to that risk thing that Sam was talking about. You got to be a bit used to risk if you're going to be an entrepreneur and in business, because that spectrum of chances of making zero money or negative money and making huge amounts of money is so large that you're going to fit somewhere amongst that. Whereas it's a relatively safe sort of thing in academia as well. If you're in there, you'll get paid. You know, you don't turn up one day and see and the university or Crown Research Institute says, we're not paying you today. We can't, you haven't done anything. You didn't turn up till 10, spend an hour at coffee. We're not paying you. It's all over, go home. It just doesn't happen. So you're really, the financial rewards, it's nice and safe in academia because you get paid quite well and you can get paid reasonably well, not as well as a town clerk, but reasonably well. And then finally, the work-related transaction. This was the main one I started off with in my table. So the table originally only had one line, which didn't make a table, so I had to make all of those ones up to make it into a table. But the last one is the most important one, and that's about work-related transactions. And this is what I think most entrepreneurs find really good when they start out or move into business from academia, is that it's really, really simple in business. You go out there and you say, can you do this for me? And the person will say either, or the business will say, yes, we can do that, or no, that we can do that. No, we can't do that. And you say, how much will it cost? And they say, it'll cost $1,000. And you then go, yes or no, and that's it. That's all over. That's done. So transactions are really, really simple. It basically comes down to you pay someone to do something, and when they've done it, they get their money. If they don't do it, they don't get their money. That's it. And that's really, really nice. You know, you phone someone up to buy a piece of equipment for the brewery, for example, and you'll say, have you got a blah, blah, blah pump that does this? And they'll go, no. And so you phone someone else, have you got a they'll do this? And they'll go, yes. And you say, how much is it? It's $1,000. I'll be around to pick it up. You go around there and you pick it up, take it back, and it works, and it's all good. Whereas, you know, that's not the case in academia. Besides, you have this whole thing of going on where work-related transactions become incredibly complicated. because it's not about money. You don't go down to Charlotte's lab and say, Charlotte, I want to use your gas chromatogram this afternoon. And Charlotte will go, well, no, that came off my Marsden grant, you know, we've got people here doing, but it's not doing anything, Charlotte. I don't care, you're not using it. And that does happen, you know it happens, you know I'm not lying. And so, and I only know that because I've been through this. So you have to have this whole complex social arrangement where you have to go and talk to Charlotte and be nice to Charlotte. Say, Charlotte, your work is amazing. You know, you are the best scientist I know. Can I use your gas chromatogram? Yeah, sure, Ralph. And it's really, really difficult. And it does slow things up because you do have that situation where you can't simply go in with a wad of money and say, here it is, I'm in. You know, go and use the chromatogram, you're away. And I mean, that's exaggerating. I'm exaggerating it a lot there. But you do know what I mean by that. And that's what I really like when I moved from academia into the business world. I was surprised at how quickly you could get things done, simply because nobody wanted anything else except your money. And that's good, because all you wanted was their product. You didn't want to talk to them. You didn't want to have to take them for coffee, take them down to Charles at the staff club and have a beer. You didn't need to do that. You just, you paid your money and it was all good. What I've found difficult or most unenjoyable in going to business, and that's pretty simple really, it's the financial management on top of everyday logistical management of a business and making beer. So you do everything in the day to make the business work, and then you have all of that stuff on top of it. And that's no different in academia as well, is it? You go into the lab and you do your work and you write your papers and you do this and you all those bits and pieces. Then you come back and you've got to fill out 1 million forms and a grant thing and this and that and the next thing. So you do have those things in business that are really unenjoyable, but you are unavoidable. And taxes, of course, are the most unavoidable of them all. The GST, the excise tax we pay on alcohol, the PAYE, the ACC levies, all those things that come in. And they were really incredibly foreign when I left academia into business. They were the things I didn't know anything about. And they do hit you a little bit because you think, oh, thank goodness I've done my GST. And then the next day there's another one, and then the next day something. And they are very time consuming, and they just keep coming endlessly. And that is, as I say, the thing I was most unfamiliar with and what I found the most difficult amongst it. The other most difficult thing is the real unpredictability of business, of course, and we all know this sort of look where this comes from. But this is Friday afternoon in the brewery. That was a few visitors. No, it's you do get these things in business that, like in academia here as well, but business, of course, are incredibly dangerous events like this can break or make a business in some ways, because you don't have that you don't have that financial backing that you have with a stable income to be able to overcome these sorts of situations. We were very lucky in the earthquake, but it just reminded me of how fragile some businesses are, and particularly on the eastern side of the city, where some of those businesses are incredibly hardly hit, how fragile that whole working environment is and the risk involved with being in business and being an entrepreneur. And trying to minimise risk, but of course predicting events like these, for example, or any other events, whether it's a financial crisis overseas, if you're trying to sell high-end equipment, or whether it's a natural disaster, are the most difficult of all of them. The other good thing about having a PhD is you're relatively good at reading graphs as well. So I was looking for something on Google Images, and this image popped up, and this is for those of you who tweet. Any tweeters in the room? One. Come on. What? Maybe that's something else I put in, how to tweet. I should have put that. You learn that when you're marketing in business. But tweeting about beer and pizza. Now there's the relationship between them. It's pretty obvious, isn't it? But what I really liked about it is that on Fridays, the beer tweeting peaks well above the pizza tweeting. And then on Saturday, you notice that there's a peak in the beer tweeting just before the peak in the pizza tweeting. So people are drinking their beer before they're eating their pizza. And then it's all the other way around. People are eating their pizza thinking, oh my God, I wish I hadn't drunk so much beer in the weekend. So the pizza tweeting is much higher than the beer tweeting. And that's, that's probably the key thing I learnt from my PhD is how to read into such a key graph like that one. I don't know if that's missing a little bit off the top there, but certainly it's when you think about moving out of science, and moving out of academia or moving out of Crown Research Institutes into business, it's always a bit of a pry. Like people say, why you leave science? Did you leave science? Or how can you be leaving science? But when you think about it, what is the best thing about scientists of having an arming of scientifically trained people sprinkled amongst the community? That's what science should be about, isn't it? It's such a big part of our lives and our future that you really do have to move from that academic environment and be out there and in that business. And these days, business and science are so overlapping in almost any aspect of business you take on. It's unavoidable. So enough of that. That's it from me. A nice picture of what I brought along for you to have a taste of, which I hope is just cool enough out the back there. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Val.